possible. First, I've repeatedly voiced Russia's official stance. Iran has the right to a peaceful nuclear program, and it can't be singled out for discrimination. Second, we need to be aware that Iran is located in a very challenging region. I've told our Iranian partners about that. That's why Iranian threats made towards neighboring countries, in particular Israel, threats that Israel can be destroyed, are absolutely unacceptable. This is counterproductive.
Brussels is planning to talk Latin American countries out of boosting agricultural exports to Russia. That's according to the Financial Times, citing senior EU officials. Nations such as Brazil and Chile were set to meet the shortfall when Russia introduced a food embargo on a range of European products in response to EU sanctions. And more on that from our correspondent in Berlin, Peter Oliver.
Well, following Russia's decision to ban the import of certain foodstuffs and agricultural produce from Europe as well as other countries in retaliation to the sanctions that were imposed, the economic sanctions that were imposed on Russia, we understand that Brussels are going to try and contact some countries in Central and South America in order to dissuade them from selling the blockaded, the banned foodstuffs to Russia at a decent price. Now, what we're particularly looking at is countries like Brazil and Chile. Now, Brazil has already seen this as an opportunity. It has long trading history with Russia. It's set to open around 90 meat processing plants. It's expected that Brazil will be the place that Russia goes to try and get its beef and pork. Also, Chile, which is set to be the place it goes to for fish imports that it's no longer accepting from the European Union. Now, those farmers that are here in Europe, well, they're saying that when Washington and Brussels came up with the sanctions against Russia, they weren't thinking about them and they didn't think about the consequences it could have.
When making a decision to impose sanctions on Russia, the EU should have realized that businesses will have problems, that Russia won't let it go and will take responsive measures, for which we are paying right now. We need access to the markets. It would help solve the deadlock situation in which, for example, the fruit sector is in.
Elsewhere, Poland is preparing an appeal to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, against the sanctions imposed by Russia. They say that it infringes upon the rights, particularly apples were a huge import to Russia from Poland. What they're saying is it goes against WTO rules. Russia says not in the slightest, doesn't infringe upon anything that the WTO suggests. And it says that nobody was complaining to the WTO when sanctions were imposed on Russia. So what we're seeing is these tit-for-tat sanctions starting to bite, and the people that they're impacting on the most are the farming business and the agricultural industry in Europe.
Robert Oates, who's the head of the Bruges Group think tank, believes the Latin American countries won't bend under the pressure from Brussels.
Well, really, it's time that the European Union, as well as perhaps even the United States, stop dictating to other countries around the world, Argentina, Brazil, Chile. So really, it will be in their economic interest to expand their trade with Russia. This is a very good opportunity for them and to forge closer links with Russia as well. So really, these countries will not bow to pressure from other states, and they will look to expand their links with Russia, just like China has recently done in terms of gas and oil supplies.
I have no doubts that Iran is compliant with the rules, simply because there's no proof of the opposite. According to the latest IAEA report, Iran has been abiding by the commitments it has taken up. True, there are some outstanding issues, but with due patience and friendly attitudes, they can be resolved. I have a great respect for Iran and a great interest in it. This is a great country indeed. You don't often hear this attitude mentioned in relation to Iran, but it's true. This is a country with a great culture, a great history, and is a great nation. They're very proud of their country. They have their own understanding of their place, both in the region and in the world, and that's something you have to respect. You've grasped the core of the problem. Iranians are very smart and cunning politicians, and to a certain degree they have exploited this confrontation with the United States.
They are not the only ones.
They're extremely crafty in this, and they do it to tackle their domestic political issues. When there's an external enemy, it united the nation. But I guess the United States have been employing the same technique. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there have been no external threats that would allow Washington to dominate the West. There must be a threat so that the US can protect their allies from it. This position yields political and economic benefits. If everyone relies on one country for protection, then this country is entitled to some preferential treatment. So it's very important to possess this status of a global defender, to be able to resolve issues even beyond the realm of foreign policy and security issues. I think the US has been using Iran for this very purpose, that it is to unite their allies in the shadow of a real or false threat. It's quite a complicated issue, but it's not an issue for Russia. We've been complying with our international commitments, including on Iran's peaceful nuclear program. As you know, Russia built the Bushehr power plant in Iran. We've completed this project and are prepared for further cooperation. Yet when we proposed to enrich uranium on Russian territory, our Iranian partners refused for reasons unknown to us. They argue that they will enrich uranium on their own, in line with existing international regulations. And as I said earlier, if they don't break any rules, they're fully entitled to do that. We will endorse this right, but we will also remain aware of the concerns that other states and the international community has concerning full compliance with these rules.
Moscow has banned a number of nations from Russia's food market. RT's Peter Oliver now here to tell us more about this. Live from Berlin. Peter, hi, good to see you. Looks like the first serious response from Russia then.
Well, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has confirmed that all imports into Russia of beef, pork, cheese, poultry and fish from those countries that backed sanctions against Russia are no longer going to be allowed. So that's a ban on all of those things coming in from the EU, the US, Australia, Canada and Norway. Now, in another move, what's been announced on Thursday, transit for air travel between Ukraine that would have had a transit stop off in Russia is now no longer going to be allowed to enter Russian airspace. So that means if you were going to fly from, say, Kiev to Hong Kong and you had a layover in Moscow, that flight's not going anywhere
trade
right
specialist
now.
Nigel Kushner joining us here on RT International. Thanks for coming on. How painful do you think, if at all, perhaps, could the Russian sanctions be for the EU or the US?
Well, it will certainly be painful. This episode reminds me of the old Irving Berlin song, "Anything you can do, I can do better." And I think what Russia are doing is they're saying, if you hit us, we will hit you back equally as hard. Now, on a global or on a macro level, I don't think it's going to be as devastating as everyone thinks. Although the export of these types of produce to Russia are worth some 12 billion euros in 2013, according to the European Commission, that only represents some 10% of the overall exports from the EU to Russia. But that said, it will have a devastating impact on particular countries, including Poland, Romania, the Netherlands. You will have individual producers who will be hit very hard indeed. If you have perishable goods, you can't simply sell them to someone else the next day for the same price. They're going to lose a lot of money.
The Russian government is considering a limit or a complete ban on European flights crossing its airspace to Asia. And that's been reported by Russian media, citing a source in the government. The possible move comes in response to EU sanctions that have been imposed on Moscow. Joining me now is venture capital host Katie Pilbeam. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us here to talk about this. Well, first off, how big of a move would that be?
OK, we're going to demonstrate it with maps, actually, Marina. So here we go. It's all very much up in the air at the moment. So let's actually see what this would all mean then in practice. So the system charges European airlines to fly over Siberia to Japan and South Korea, which is the shortest route, which means ultimately less time and therefore less costs in total. Now, this route saves 4.5 hours in flight time. As you can see, it's quite a difference. Now, the deal was arranged back in the 70s, and it means a saving us of $30,000 for each flight. Now, Aeroflot takes $200 million in such payments per year on average. Now, for argument's sake, if Aeroflot, which holds the exclusive rights to the route, were to stop European flights from using this route, then this is the route that they would have to take. So as you can see, it's obviously a lot longer. You've either got up or down right there. This could be a possible reaction to its budget airline Dobrolet having to cease its operations as a result of EU sanctions. The new airline can't get access to various services such as maintenance and flight information. Now, before joining the World Trade Organization, Russia did plan to decrease the overflight fees before cancelling them altogether. But obviously the international environment is intensified, sanctions have intensified, and obviously the situation has changed as a result. So more costs, more time up in the air is the result of all of this, Marina.
Right, up in the air is probably the right way to describe things at the moment. But thanks so much, Katie, for bringing us the details of this. Katie Pilgrim there.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.